Hey everyone, so my last video was kind of a 5 full fragrances that you can wear that are safe for almost any occasion, any time. It's quite an introductory video, I guess, in a way. Later on this week I'm going to be doing my own personal fragrances that I'll be wearing this fall. It will be a little bit more diverse. It's going to have a lot more niche, a little bit of designer, a little bit of cheapy, so it's going to kind of be a bit broader. But yeah, in that last video I made, I said that I would make individual reviews for each of the fragrances, so if any of them kind of piqued your interest, you can have a look. So that's what we're going to be doing now. In this review, we're going to be looking at Hugo Boss X-By. So the bottle is very simple. It's actually kind of boring. It's one of my least favourite bottles I think I've ever seen. It's literally just a round cylinder. Just says Hugo X-By on the front. The XX is exactly the same, except from it's champagne coloured and it says XX on the front. Yeah, pretty basic cap, just clips on and off. The spray is okay, works quite nicely, but again, doesn't look anything special. On the bottom there, you get all the jazz, so yeah, you can pretty much see that. But that's pretty much the presentation for it. It's really basic. It's one of my least favourite bottles probably I've ever seen. But you know, bottle's a bottle. So Hugo X-By, what's it all about? Why am I doing a review of an old fragrance that's discontinued now, that didn't seem to put up any trees when it came out? I really like it. That's why I'm going to do a review for it. I think it's interesting. I think the pear leaf note is something you don't see every day, and then mix that with basil and mint in it. Again, I don't think you see it every day, and it is discontinued, but it is cheap and it is still quite easy to get. So what is it? It came out in 2007, and it came out as a kind of couple fragrance. You had like Hugo X-By, which was the kind of for men, and then you had Hugo XX, which was like the for women version. And the XX was exactly the same, but it had like gold lettering and it was all kind of champagne coloured. But they were kind of made as fragrances that were supposed to go well together, so you would wear them together. So like, you know, the husband or boyfriend would wear the X-By, and then the wife or the girlfriend would wear the XX, and they would kind of work well together. Or you could kind of swap them over. Like, this is definitely the male marketed version, and then the XX was marketed towards the females, but the idea was that they were kind of, I wouldn't say marketed as unisex, but they were kind of suggesting that you could perhaps like swap them. The marketing was a bit batty for it, no surprise. Ugly bottle, weird marketing, sort of in many respects middle of the road scent, sort of equals discontinued. But you know, so I just said there, middle of the road scent, so why am I reviewing it? Well, A, I mean, I don't think you should just review positive things, but B, I think it is a middle of the road scent. I think a lot of people will smell it and think, I've got things that smell better than that I would wear at the same time. But I think it's also overlooked a little bit. So the note breakdown is quite simple. In the top, you've got pear leaf bergamot. In the middle, you've got a basil and mint. And in the bottom, you've got patchouli, musk and cedar. So it's quite basic. Say it's quite a linear fragrance. What do I get out of it? In the top, right, so again, I've got the dry down here, but I'll give it a spray because the dry down it alters a little bit, and this one it loses the top quite quick. So it was it smelling the top. When you first spray it, this is now I've heard this has been reformulated again. This is quite an old bottle. This is, well, I bought it when it was released. I actually went to the department store, and the woman they were probably, you know, the big marketing push when fragrance was released, and they kind of snagged me with the free bath towel. So I just ended up buying it. So this is from the release. I've heard it's been reformulated and the pear leaf has gone a bit missing, but it's a shame because when you spray it, the first thing that I get is quite strong pear leaf and a little bit of bergamot. And that's really interesting. And that's one of the things I really like about it, because now pear is quite a sweet note in fragrances. You see it in like Le Male is a, you know, Jean Paul Gaultier Le Male, and you know, it's very sweet. But obviously with this being the pear leaf, it's got that sweetness, but it's much greener, and that's what I get. So straight off the bat, you get this very green, very like springtime. I would think that, you know, I would smell this and I would think I'm going to be wearing that in the spring. It's really green, little bit of sweetness from the pear, and the bergamot kind of hits at the start, but already after like 30 seconds it's leaving, just sort of leaving you with the pear. But now you start getting the basil and the mint sort of coming through, and they're amazing. And they're what I really like about this fragrance, and I'll explain why now, because I think this is actually a cold weather fragrance. I think a lot of people smell that opening and they smell the green and they think that's a spring fragrance. But I think if you wear this in the winter on the kind of blue sky days, I think it works really well. And it works well because of those three notes that are coming through now very strongly, which is pear, basil and mint. Now I can't really smell any of the bottom notes very well. There's a little bit of patchouli, but that's about it. But the dominant notes are the pear leaf, the mint and the basil. And if you think about that, that's amazing, because you get this real freshness from the green, from the pear leaf, and the basil and the mint. They're all quite, you know, fresh notes. So you got the mint that's quite kind of sort of cleans your sinuses. It's very sort of fresh and uplifting. At the same time, that pear leaf is very green, and it's just sweet enough to kind of drag it out of the kind of earth, because it's otherwise, if it didn't have the sweetness from the bergamot and the pear leaf, it would just be really green and kind of a bit boring. But that pear just pulls it out just enough to make it sweet enough to sort of survive. But the note I find the most interesting, and the reason I'm saying it about winter, is the basil. And the basil, it's got that pepperiness, that nice pepper. Now what it does is it adds a bit of spice to it, but rather than it being like a strong oriental spice, it's a very green sort of it's quite synthetic smelling, but it gives you the impression of that kind of green, more natural sort of spice, just a little bit of herbiness, and it's just warm enough to offset the mint and the pear leaf, so that you got that kind of cool freshness of the green, and then the peppiness of the peppery kind of spiciness or herbiness of the basil. It's just enough to warm that up and sort of bring it back into the middle again. So then you're left with this kind of like green, slightly warm but very fresh feel. And I feel like that really works in cooler weather, because when the weather's quite cold, you go out and you've got that smell in the air already. Like, you know, you get that kind of, when you go out, if you live in a country like England, like me, in the winter sometimes, you know, winter and spring specifically, you get those, and autumn, like late, early to mid-autumn, moving like into the kind of late winter and spring, you get those days where it's blue sky, beautiful sunshine, but it's like 0 degrees, and the air is really cold, but it's really fresh and it's quite invigorating. And that really is where this works, because those three notes, like I said, that's what they're trying to give you. You know, that's really what they smell like. Is there's that green freshness, that kind of like invigorating pep, I guess. But with that herbiness from the basil, it's just enough to keep it warm, and that really works, because I think it mirrors, rather than sort of, often is the case, you know, when the cold weather hits, we'll put on our heavy fragrances that are quite sort of spicy and warm, and, you know, a lot of incense and things like that. And I get it, I do it myself as well, but just as a kind of something different, I think this works, because it's almost, instead of trying to sort of push against the weather, it's just saying, oh, bugger it, let's just go with it. you know, like, and it's sort of mirroring the weather of those colder, fresh days. And that's why I think it really works. And that's why, you know, I put this in my top 5 for kind of safe, full fragrances. And it's why I'm doing this review now, because I think it's really overlooked in that sense. Say it's quite a boring fragrance, but it's quite linear. So this is the dry down, which is very different actually. It's just lost a lot of the green, and now the kind of patchouli and basil, it's more or less sort of patchouli, basil and mint. It's still fresh, but not in that summer freshy way. Like, I don't want it to come across like it's nothing like kind of aqua, no kind of like aqua-y, watery kind of beach. I wouldn't wear this to the beach. No way, not never. I wouldn't wear it in the summer, to be honest. I think in the summer the pear note might be a little bit cloying, but it definitely would work in the winter. So I think people perhaps get this sort of, you know, they smell that green freshness and they get it a little wrong. But yeah, anyway, that's pretty much what it smells like. I think it really works for colder days, and I think the dry down's really great. Yeah, it's just sort of the patchouli and the musk is really smells great. You get this kind of musky, patchouli, earthy freshness. But whereas I just did a review for the Hermes, and that's a kind of dank patchouli, you know, it's a real kind of like muddy, gritty earthiness. This is much fresher. You know, it's more like it's just on the periphery, that kind of musky, the musk and the patchouli just on the periphery, just kind of making it interesting. But yeah, I mean, otherwise it is quite a boring fragrance. There's nothing special about it. I don't feel like it's not going to bring, you know, it's not going to plop any trees. It kind of is what it is. But I quite like that about it. And I think it's a shame that it got discontinued, because I think it is safe and it is boring and it is linear to a degree, but it's kind of interesting. Like, it's not quite as boring as it makes out. It's almost, it does boring in an interesting way. That almost sounds impossible and like a contradiction, but it does. Like, it is this kind of fresh green smell, and that's really the kind of core of it, right? And that's quite boring, you know. It's nothing you haven't smelled before, and it's nothing you wouldn't have smelled that's done way better. But if you actually smell it, like break it down and smell the notes, then it becomes interesting, because the pear leaf with the mint and the basil, that's quite an unusual combination, really. I can't think of another fragrance that kind of pairs those together. In fact, I can't think of any. There might be some. If you know of any, put them in the comments. So I'd be interested to know. But that's quite an unusual grouping, and I like that. And I think it's a shame that it got discontinued. So yeah, that's pretty much my review. At the long and the short of it, quite boring, quite linear, but in an interesting way. And it's discontinued now, but it's dead easy to get, so you can still find it online, and it's really cheap. So I think if you can find this cheap, just grab it, pick it up. It's better than most cheapies. Like, you know, you can, it's probably about 15-20 quid now, 15 or 20 pound, and that price, what else you can buy? Like some cheapie that smells like trash, you know, like, or it's a clone of something else. Like, well, why not just buy something interesting? You know, I recommend it. I think people would enjoy it. And I think it's interesting in the way where it's not pretentious, you know, it's not. See, this is why it's difficult, because if you're really into fragrances, you're not going to find this that interesting, because niches are, you know, it's not a much more interesting usually, and much more complex. Whereas this is kind of simple, but it's still interesting, but it's interesting in a simple and boring way. So yeah, that's my review. That's my Hugo XY review. Might not sound great. I really actually enjoy this fragrance. I might have made that sound like it's really crap, but I really enjoy it. I do like wearing it. I don't wear it much. I say I've had this since 2006, and that's all I've used. So I don't wear it much, but when I do wear it, always enjoy it. So, you know, I'd recommend it for cheap. Wouldn't spend a lot of money on it, but if you can get it cheap, why not? Cheers. That's my Hugo sort of review. It's a bit contradictory maybe. I hope you could kind of see where I was coming from. If you could or couldn't, either way, whack it in the comments, let me know. Say if you know any other fragrances that use that kind of similar kind of pear, basil, mint, let me know, because I think it's quite an interesting little trifecta there. But yeah, cheers, thanks for watching.